and we'll provide also. This webinar will be recorded, so will be available afterward for folks to listen to. Okay, so with that, without further ado, so Jennifer, please go ahead to present. And for the questions, so we're going to wait till the end, and then Jennifer can answer your question, or you can type in the chat box so we can ask from there. Okay, with that, let's warm welcome Jennifer to give us this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Here, I'll get to my presentation. Okay, you can see my screen all right? I'll confirm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
All right, I'm going to minimize the speaking window here, and I will begin presenting here. Okay, so thank you very much for that introduction, Chiadi. So yes, I wanted to describe for everyone here today. Thank you for having me here today. Some of the work that we've been doing in the Geospatial Center at the ABMI for the last while, actually, and I know some of you, I saw some familiar names in the participant list. I know some of you are already familiar with some of this work. I'm not sure, some of you probably never heard of what we're doing here, so this will be a good description of what we're doing. So without further ado, as I'm sure most of you are quite aware, Alberta's landscape is always changing. It's very dynamic, both due to natural and anthropogenic processes, all sorts of things going on our landscape. So this means that mapping and monitoring these changes is really important for effectively managing that landscape and sustainably managing that landscape. And one key source of information that has become more and more widely known is the ABMI's Human Footprint Inventory. Now, before I get into that, I wanted to describe for you the ABMI, or the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute. I don't know if everyone is familiar with them, so I wanted to give you a little very short bit of background here so that everyone kind of understands what they do. So the ABMI provides relevant, scientifically credible information on Alberta's living resources. So they are in the business of monitoring biodiversity, as you can tell from the name. And this means that they track changes in wildlife and habitats from border to border across the province. And a lot of the data and products that they produce, that they collect and then put into a usable format, are publicly accessible on their website, abmi.ca, for anyone to go in there and use. So there are a lot of on-the-ground measurements that take place across the province every year. And these are complemented by provincial level geospatial products. And this is where I come in. I work in the Geospatial Center, as Chiadi mentioned. And so the ABMI has this product called the Human Footprint Inventory that is a comprehensive, up-to-date digital representation of human disturbances across Alberta. And the latest release is a 2018 data set. This image I have here is from a previous slide deck, so I threw it in here. It's from the features from before, but it won't look that much different in 2018. And so these features range in age from very recent, just updated within the past year, to multiple decades. Some of them are over 50 years old. So there's quite a range in the types of features and their ages, and they include both temporary successional features like seismic lines, like harvest areas, and permanent features like roads and urban areas. But all these features so far are treated equally, or have been treated equally in the human footprint inventory, regardless of any regeneration that may have occurred, especially on those temporary successional features. So the data set hasn't really captured that dynamic status of these temporary features so far. But we've been changing that. So our goal has been to integrate dynamic information on regeneration for relevant human footprint features. So this is where our work comes in. So when we want to look at this regeneration and we want to look at it over Alberta for large timescales, the only real feasible way of doing this is with satellite remote sensing. It gives us those repeating synoptic or comprehensive views of the land surface, and the Landsat image archive itself is continually being collected since the 80s. So it gives us a really consistent, long-running, for satellite data, long-running archive that we can draw upon to do this. So when we started this work, we started with harvest areas. They are large enough that we can see them easily and characterize them easily with something like Landsat, which has a 30-meter pixel resolution. Harvest areas themselves are all across Alberta's forested regions, or across much of the forested regions. And they generally show a similar follow a similar sort of spectral trajectory. So they kind of show a similar life history in a lot of ways. They're similar to one another in a lot of ways. That makes it a good place to start with these harvest areas and what we're trying to do. So I just want to describe for you what I'm talking about when I talk about spectral regeneration, so that we're on the same page here. And so this is showing you a spectral signature curve. Spectral reflectance of green healthy vegetation over various wavelengths. The wavelengths are on the x-axis there. So you can see there are some places in the red and blue, especially visible wavelengths, where those wavelengths are absorbed by chlorophyll. Then you have in the near infrared portion of the spectrum, you have a lot of reflectance due to leaf structure. And then you have water, you have absorption of wavelengths due to water in the plants in certain other wavelengths in the shortwave infrared. And so we're using that to look at vegetation on the ground and changes in this spectral reflectance. So the reflectance of these various wavelengths from the surface, from the leaf surface, from the ground surface, reflect changes on that surface. And when we're looking at vegetation, we're often doing this with vegetation indices, spectral vegetation indices. And these are indices that combine particular spectral bands into an index that is designed to respond really well to surface vegetation, usually drawing on red visible, near infrared, and or shortwave infrared in order to do that. So one that if you use any vegetation indices, you're probably very familiar, or at least have heard of, the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI. This is the most widely known one, or one of the most widely known ones. So this simply takes this reflectance and takes the reflectance in the near infrared and red and puts it into this normalized ratio in order to build an index that responds and increases when you have more biomass and more chlorophyll and more photosynthesis going on, and decreases when you have less of that. So it responds to changes in vegetation. So when I'm talking about spectral regeneration, I'm talking about the return of spectral signals to pre-disturbance levels after that disturbance has happened. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about spectral regeneration. Now, the NDVI is very popular and it is very useful in a lot of places, but it does also tend to saturate at higher biomass. So this is a drawback when we want to look at longer term analyses, like with regeneration, say in harvest areas. So what we've been using is something called the normalized burn ratio that's very similar, but uses shortwave infrared instead of the red visible band. And this particular index doesn't saturate as much, and as you can tell from the name was first designed to look at wildfires and burn severity, and it works really well for that, and it's been shown to work really well for looking at forests with satellite data and looking at changes in those forests. So the near infrared here is responding to structure in the plant, leaf structure, and the shortwave infrared is responding to moisture content in the vegetation as well as in the soils. So here's sort of an example to kind of visualize this. Here's just an area in Alberta that is a harvested area. You see the true color on top, and then the indices, the NDVI and the NBR on the bottom. And here you've got some of the trees have been removed, some of the vegetation. You can see that those indices decrease as the vegetation is removed. You can see that the bottom one, the normalized burn ratio, responds more strongly to this than the NDVI. And then as vegetation is returning, you see those indices increasing in brightness and value. And then here with the NDVI, the spectral signature is getting close to what it was before. The normalized burn ratio is still coming back, so we have a longer time period to look at the vegetation with the NBR. Here's another example here of this is a single pixel time series. So this is an annual NBR value that represents summertime or growing season NBR for that pixel for each year. And so you see in 1985, this area is forested, then a road is built next to it, then it is harvested in 1994. You can see that the NBR values drop, they become dark there. Then 1999, 5 years later, vegetation is coming back. And then at the end of this particular time series in 2017, you can see that the spectral signature is back to what it was before the harvest. We recognize that doesn't mean that the forest, a mature forest, has grown back. We understand that this is a spectral signature and it's reflecting vegetation, but it doesn't necessarily reflect regeneration in the same way as you would measure it on the ground. So you could have a very different vegetative community there. You could have very different structure, very different composition. But we're looking at the broad patterns here so we're looking at the spectral signal, which is a different way of looking at it than from the ground. It's a complementary way. So in looking at this, our challenge was that doing this over Alberta requires a lot of imagery. There are 48 Landsat tiles that cover Alberta. There are more than 30 years of Landsat data, and each year itself has over 20 images for that year. And then you also have multiple Landsat sensors. Right now, both 7 and 8 are collecting imagery, so you have many images per year. And a rough estimation, if we wanted to do this over Alberta, is almost 14 terabytes of data. So the amount of storage space and processing power that you would need for that, if you wanted to do this, hasn't something that's been very easily available to many individuals, organizations thus far. But that has been changing, which is great. This new technologies and tools that have recently become more available and more widespread have really helped us actually tackle this challenge. So large geospatial analyses have been shifting away from, in a lot of instances, not everywhere, but in a lot of instances, from desktop to cloud platforms. So these new cloud-based tools and technologies have been changing things, and they've allowed us to start reaching our goal, to do what it is we want to do and look at regeneration across the province. So we have the things that are fueling this change is this crazy growth in public open access satellite data streams. You've got data from the USGS, the Landsat data, you've got MODIS data. The European Space Agency has all the different Copernicus Sentinel constellations going, and that all becomes publicly available. And so these are often provided through cloud technology you can access them on the cloud, and this is one way of accessing them and working with them. So the cloud has enabled all of these data to be accessed as well as processed, and then that kind of fuels more and more data to be put up there and made accessible. This is sort of a self-perpetuating cycle, it seems to me. So some of the tools for processing and analyzing these data are Descartes Labs and Planet Labs. Both have tools that are online tools that you can use. Their cloud processing power to access and work with the imagery. And then what we've been using that works really well for us is Google Earth Engine. Google has this Earth Engine platform that is free to use for non-commercial purposes, and that's what we've been using. And it's been growing in popularity by leaps and bounds, and has really let us do what it is we want to do here. So very quickly, Google Earth Engine is this planetary scale platform for Earth science data and analysis. So this is from the Google Earth Engine website. These are sort of their three main components. You have satellite imagery, there are petabytes and petabytes of data up there that you can access and work with. And you can also add your own data into your workspace and work with it in there, which is great. Then they have a space where you can customize and create your own scripts and codes in order to do a very customized analysis. And then you can pull that out. You can save and download your results. You can create custom apps or web maps and things. There are all sorts of creative ways of working with these tools. And so I'm going to go through here. I'll just keep an eye on the time. Quickly as I can through our methods. With this group, I really wanted to explain what we were doing here. I imagined there would be a lot of interest in how exactly we go about doing this. So I go into a bit of detail here. So we've got harvest area polygons from that human footprint inventory. Now we pre-process them before we bring them into Google Earth Engine. So we buffer them to kind of get rid of edges, to try and minimize edge effects with with the Landsat lining up with the Landsat data. We simplify them to make them easier to work with. We remove ones that are just too small to look at with Landsat pixels. A Landsat pixel is about 900 meters squared, so we want to remove the polygons that are smaller than that. Within Google Earth Engine, we bring together Landsat imagery from Landsats 5, 7, and 8. We do some calibration on Landsat 8 so that it matches the other two. There's cloud and shadow masking that's actually already done for us in Google Earth Engine. We then take imagery from the growing season, from the summer. So we minimize snow and things like that. And we create an annual median composite. So this is a way of kind of getting a sort of almost like a best available pixel, but a way of getting an annual composite that will represent the growing season for that year for each pixel. So we then end up with a time series of this, and we extract that normalized burn ratio index, and we get these time series. And then we use a tool called LandTrender. And this is a set of algorithms that was developed out of, I think, the University of Oregon. Somewhere right there on the west coast, the northwest coast. And it's a set of algorithms that do the temporal segmentation on these types of time series, and it was specifically designed for looking at changes in vegetation on the Earth's surface. So this worked really well for us. This helped us to minimize some noise and really extract the main trends that are happening in our time series. So then we have these time series, and then we do a bunch of calculations using those time series. So this is where we're calculating a series of metrics to try and characterize what's going on in a particular pixel over time. So we look at what the spectral index was like before a detected harvest. We detect when that signal drops. That's when you have a removal of vegetation, that NBR value drops. So we're detecting when that happens, what the values or the spectral signature is like before and after, when the signature starts to come back, and how much it's come back after 5 years of spectral regeneration, and how long it takes to get to 80% of its pre-harvest levels. And then we look at what the spectral regeneration level is like at the current time, or at the end of our time series, whatever year that happens to be that we're looking at. So we look at all these different things. We create a number of different layers for each of these different metrics. Then we want to make sure that we are not including pixels that are not going to represent what it is we really want to get at with these harvest areas. So with things like retention, or sometimes roads or well sites that you have in a harvest area, you don't want to include those. We didn't want to include those in our calculations here. So we did some flagging and masking in order to remove those types of pixels, or where you have potentially multiple disturbance events. Sometimes there's a harvest and then you might have a wildfire come through later on, and that means the signal that we're getting is not the signal that we're specifically looking for. That's something that we would like to deal with later on, but for now we're just looking at spectral regeneration after harvest. So we have masked out those pixels we don't want in our metric layers, and then we bring in those processed polygons from the human footprint inventory, and we summarize over each harvest area with mean and standard deviation the various metrics, and we're only using the pixels that haven't been masked out. So we come out with these giant CSV tables out of Google Earth Engine. They need some reformatting, so we bring them into RStudio. I use R to do this. We reformat them. We decided to set a threshold for 50%, where 50%, at least 50% of those pixels for representing that harvest area need to be used in the calculations for us to keep that polygon in our data set. Otherwise, we're not sure we're as confident in that we're capturing what's going on in that harvest area if we have more of those pixels flagged out. So we do some of that quality control. We make sure that the harvest areas that we're looking at have at least 9 sort of contiguous pixels. In an ideal world, that would give you one central pixel with surrounded by pixels. So you kind of have a block that's going to be representing what's going on the ground. And then what we did was we created some kind of relative confidence scores. We wanted to kind of gauge in a relative sense how confident we were in various harvest areas. So looking at things like variability in the different metrics. So harvest areas where there's a higher standard deviation, a lot more variability in, say, the year of harvest or spectral regeneration, we realize that what we're capturing is there's a lot more going on the ground than what was represented by, say, our mean, year of harvest in that harvest area. So we set some relative confidence scores in there, and then size as well. The larger harvest areas and the more pixels you have representing that harvest area, the more confident we are in what we're pulling out spectrally. So we created this sort of total confidence score, and we just used some basic statistics to remove those outliers that have really low harvest or really low confidence scores. Sorry. Then we're bringing this back into ArcGIS. I bring back in this refined table of results and our original harvest area polygons, and we join them together back into a shapefile, into a vector database. Then, to be sure that we're not having effects remaining from wildfires, we use wildfire database to remove those where the signals are being influenced by wildfires that we haven't caught in all our previous steps. And then any other human footprint inventory features that might be overlapping those harvest areas, we also remove those harvest areas to be sure that we're really confident in our final data set. And then we have our final data set. So this product was finally just put up, which is really exciting. It's now live and available on the ABMI website. You can go in and download it. These slides will be shared. Perhaps at the end of my presentation, I can go in and copy and paste these URLs into the chat as well. So you can go to the ABMI website and look at these data. You can download them and explore them. There's also a metadata document there that it's good to read to really understand what all the different metrics are. And then I'll tell you a little bit about our final data set. So we used the latest, the 2018 harvest area polygons. We drew on Landsat from 1984 to 2018. So the original number of harvest areas in the data set, the HFI data set, is over 232,000. There are a lot of them. After our pre-processing, we had 177,000 that we brought into Google Earth Engine. And then after all our processing, we have spectral regeneration metrics for almost 58,000 of those harvest areas. And they are spread across Alberta. So as I just said here, we have the final data set has all the polygons in it, but it only has generation metric for those that we have that data for, that it's appropriate to have that data for, which is almost 58,000 of them, which is a fair number. Our Landsat time series covered 34 years of satellite imagery. The harvest areas themselves that have spectral regeneration metrics range from around 2 hectares to well over 500 hectares. So there's quite a variability in there. On average, and keep in mind that this includes almost 58,000 samples. So there's a lot of variability, but after 5 years on average, harvest areas were about 60% spectrally regenerated. They'd regained that much of their signal. It takes about 8.7 years for harvest areas on average to reach 80% of their pre-harvest spectral signals. Again, with a high standard deviation, there's a lot of variability in the whole data set. And then in our data set, about 68% of those harvest areas have reached 100% of their pre-harvest spectral signals. And those signals actually can often then go above and exceed pre-harvest levels, which is likely reflecting a different forest structure and community composition than what was there when it was harvested. It still would be a young successional stage, so it would have a different spectral signal, and an even stronger one than an older mature forest we've observed here in our data. So here's a sample of the data set. These are the main metrics. I apologize for noise in the background. I have kids at home schooling, and apparently things aren't going as well. So you see year of harvest in here. There's a variety of different years. And then the 5-year % spectral regeneration and the years it takes for that harvest area to get to 80% of its pre-harvest signal. I just wanted to kind of focus a little bit on a smaller area so you can kind of look more closely. There in this small area, you have different years that things were harvested, but you also have uh, different patterns in those two other metrics here. So those two metrics are complementary, and they are capturing slightly different processes or different aspects of this spectral regeneration here. So this is an interesting data set, and we're still in the process of we're now moving on to more analysis and understanding the data set. So there, along with the data set, and there is a link on the ABMI website that comes with with the data download. We created a Google Earth Engine app that lets you browse these 4 sorts of metrics over the different harvest areas. And so you can, here, I was going to actually very quickly just show you what that looks like. So if you go to that link, it shows you this page. Because I have I'm on a laptop here, this screen is a bit squished, but you can scroll through the data set. You can zoom in and zoom out to look at the data set. The gray harvest areas here are the ones that don't have spectral regeneration metrics. And then you can click on a harvest area and it will bring up those numbers for you and bring them up in that left-hand panel, and it'll show you the lat and long of where you clicked, when that was harvested, and things like that. It takes a couple minutes to do this, but this is one of just exploring the various the data set. So there's some interesting stuff in here. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. I want to make sure we have time for questions, but you can certainly go in and explore that later. So that was fun to put together. That was exciting to have that up there for people to explore the data. Okay, so now our next steps. So with this data set, we're now in our next step is to undertake an analysis. We're in the process of undertaking an analysis with environmental factors, so comparing the spectral regeneration with climatic factors, with local topographic factors, and things like that. And that's something that we're doing with a number of collaborators, and it's exciting. And then the next step that we've got here, oh, why is this not moving to the next? Okay, here we go. The next step is we've also we've been very generously given some permanent sample plot data from the Alberta government, and Alpaca has very generously provided some establishment survey data. So we're starting to make comparisons between our spectral regeneration and some ground data, which is even more exciting. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and we're now getting into doing that. So that's great. And then the other thing that we're working on is expanding this approach to other types of human footprint features. So ABMI eventually in the long term would like to have information on this sort of information on spectral regeneration for a lot of different human footprint features. We started with harvest areas. That was sort of a low-hanging fruit. That was the easiest to start with. And now we're looking at other human footprint features. So I'm going to describe some of that for you right now as well. So the 2 main features that we've been focusing on here are mine and well site features. Now, why mine and well site features, you might ask? So they are generally large enough to comprise multiple Landsat pixels. Well sites can be smaller. They're smaller than harvest areas, certainly, but they still can usually comprise multiple pixels in there. And these footprints, yeah, even more importantly, are footprints where post-disturbance reclamation is happening, where reclamation is mandated and being undertaken. So we can look at reclamation and spectral signatures, and hopefully we can get some useful information out of there. And then also ABMI is a contributing partner in oil sands monitoring in the province. So these types of features are something that are of great interest as part of that work as well. So this work has understandably then focused on the areas surrounding the Athabasca oil sands. That's where we've been doing our explorations and looking at how we can best adapt these workflows for these types of features. So I'm going to show you a little bit of sort of some preliminary results and work that we've been doing. Not so much results, but just what we've been looking at. So this is showing a part of the oil sands area. This is a false color composite where each of the color channels represents that normalized burn ratio in a different year. So red would be early in the time series, I think 1984. And then red, green, I'm trying to remember the order. Green would be in the mid, maybe around 2000, and then blue would be later in the time series, around 2018. And so I don't need you to understand what the colors mean at all. It takes a lot of interpretation and thinking to understand what the colors mean. But basically what I wanted to show you with this is that it's complex. There's a lot going on in this landscape, and a lot of different features have very different spectral histories, spectral trajectories going on here. We can pull out looking at, say, year of disturbance, and this would be just the year of the largest, say, change, spectral change that we see in the signature, so the largest disturbance that we see through the spectra. And again, you can see that it's quite variable all over. There are lots of different colors, which mean different years. You can see a wildfire too in the bottom left-hand corner. That amorphous yellow kind of thing is a wildfire. So you see a lot of changes and just things, dynamic things going on in the landscape here. And then here's another thing that that we will look at is the total amount of spectral change that we see at that time of greatest change. And so there is more consistency in this image, but you still see differences. The brighter the pixel in here, the more change you see spectrally. You can see a lot of variability. Even within that wildfire itself, down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a lot of variability. So looking at what these spectral trajectories might look like, they are quite variable as well. Here are some examples from this area. So you have some reclaimed areas, you have a tailings pond here, and you have an active mining area here. And they all show very different spectral signals here, and they're all showing different things happening on the landscape. The other thing that I wanted to point out here too is that in those time series you see the land trender fitted line, the brown line through there, and you can see that it doesn't work as well for some of these features as it does for harvest areas. So that's something that we're looking at. It isn't able to follow those rapid changes as well as the harvest areas are a more predictable signal. So we're looking at this landscape and the variability here and how we can work with that. And here are some example well sites in the area that are probably like more exploration well sites that come back in their vegetation very quickly. Okay, so I just wanted to pull out one of those mine spectral trajectories here. This is a reclaimed area, just to look at it more closely so we can kind of see, even just in the Landsat imagery, what it looks like. So here's 2002. Then we have some vegetation removed in 2003 in the area. By 2007, that spectrally, the vegetation, the signal has come back almost to what it was before. Then in 2008, there was another removal of vegetation and probably also topsoil and things like that. You see the signal goes even lower the second time here, and then vegetation has come back briefly. And then this area becomes part of more of an active mining area. It's being more actively worked on here. And then you have vegetation coming back after that. Those activity has been completed, and then you have regeneration and reclamation. And you can see that reflected in the Landsat image there, the true color, as well as in the signal here. So we've got a lot of interesting and complex things going on in the landscape here. So the sorts of information that we're looking at trying to extract, and this is something that that we're exploring, and we're always open to feedback and things like that. But this is sort of what we've been looking at is, for example, how many vegetation removal events were there in that particular area over time. What was their timing? Are they close in time? Are they far apart? Are they likely to be sort of very related, or are they different separate events? What is the strength of that spectral change? Is it sort of just a removal of vegetation, or is it probably goes more than that with vegetation and topsoil and things like that? And then what's happening after that change has happened? Does the signal stay low for a while? You know, if you have a mining operation and there's no, you know, topsoil and vegetation there, then the signal's going to remain low for a while, or does it come back right away? What's going on? And potentially this visualization is sort of simplified. It would be more complicated than this, but maybe we can look at what times and for how long is the pixel a particular land cover type. When is it vegetated? When is it non-vegetated? When might it be water? And looking at things like that. So in doing this, one data set that we started looking at is the Alberta government's reclamation information system, which can be super useful. So this is available on the GeoDiscover Alberta website. And there it's called the Oil Sands Industrial Features Dataset, but it's part of this reclamation information system. So here's an example. This is from 2015. And it includes land cover disturbance and reclamation data from oil sands project operators, and these are compiled from the annual conservation and reclamation reports by the government. And they have all sorts of different sources. They come from GIS databases, from satellite mapping, from air photos and digitization, from a variety of sources. But they have data sets from the 80s and the late 90s, 2007, and then from 2010 to 2015 there's an annual database, and then they're working, I understand, on the 2017 data set for public release. It's not released yet. So right now we're just in the beginning stages of making these comparisons between our spectral signatures and this reclamation information system features, looking at what's going on at a particular time in a particular place. Pardon me, what do our spectral signals say, and then what does the database say is happening? Okay, so I'm going to wrap up here, and we'll have a few minutes for questions, which is great. So what we've done is we've been able to leverage that long-running continuous Landsat archive over these large temporal and spatial scales with the help of that Google Earth Engine platform. And we've been able to develop this repeatable workflow for characterizing spectral regeneration in harvest areas across Alberta. And we've been able to publish our first public data set. And then the idea is that because this is a repeatable workflow, we can update that easily as more information becomes available. And then we're also working with this data for some more research and analysis, comparing with ground reference data and understanding, using it to look at the role of environmental factors in broad patterns of regeneration, which is exciting stuff too. And then building on this workflow, our next step is adapting these two things like mine and well site features to other human footprint features, and to be able to pull out some useful information in those areas as well. Okay, so that is what I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. I apologize for noise in the background, but I can put these links into the chat, and then these slides will also be shared, and so you're welcome to come in and copy and paste those URLs into your browser and explore both of these things as well. Thank you. I will copy and paste right now. Okay, I will stop sharing, but I'll copy and paste these into the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer, for this very interesting talk. Yeah, really enjoyed this talk, and we have actually quite a number of questions coming in, and folks, you can start to type in your question in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself, ask questions. We do have, I think, at least 4 questions so far. So the first question from John Bruce, he asked, does this spectral regeneration differentiate between cup rock regeneration and the harvesting rows?
That's a very good question. So what our goal with using those flags and masking out pixels where we don't see, where either you don't see a harvest or you don't see regeneration coming back, we assume those pixels are are things like roads that aren't really regenerating in the same way. But to be honest, we haven't done any differentiation in, say, areas that were roads and then have been having vegetation coming back that are within a cut block area. So in that sense, no, it doesn't differentiate in those. But we also summarize over the harvest area. So those spectral signals would be kind of mixed together. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is from Daniel Abera, and he asked, I think there's a system called ARIS, ARIS, Alberta Regeneration Information System. Honestly speaking, I don't know much about the system, but I was wondering if you did any comparison of the results of your model with ARIS. Thank you.
That's a good question too. I actually am not familiar with the Alberta Regeneration Information System. I'm going to write that down. That's something that I'm not familiar with. So no, I don't have any comparisons with that particular data set, but that is something that I'm going to look up and look into, because that would be super useful. I'd love to make some comparisons in that way. So I'm afraid I don't have any comparisons right now.
Well, that's great. Actually, this is one of the purpose of this community practice, that we share information. So,
yeah.
Yeah. So next question from Bonnie, and she asked, did slope impact the classification?
So by classification, I'm not sure if I understand what you mean, Bonnie, by classification. We weren't classifying things so much. So we used the Human Footprint Inventory polygons and brought them in, and then within there, we assumed that pixels that weren't flagged for, say, not having a detectable harvest spectrally, or pixels that don't show regeneration, so we're maybe a well site or something, or that have multiple disturbances, we assume that the pixels that don't have any of those flags that are within a harvest area polygon are a harvest area. And then we use those to characterize that harvest area polygon. We didn't look at slope at this point in doing any of that work, but slope and topographic variables are something that we're looking at in that analysis that I mentioned in looking at environmental variables. Let me know if that doesn't answer your question. I'm happy to clarify further if I didn't answer.
Okay. Thank you, Jen. And the next question from Sarah Depot, and she asked, hi, Jen, great presentation. I'm wondering whether ABMI has compared spectral regeneration of wildfire polygons and harvest area polygons.
That's another great question, and that's something that that has been done in the literature. Right now, we haven't done that. We've been looking mainly at harvest area polygons, but that's something that we are interested in, especially where you have that interplay of wildfire and harvest happening in the same place. That's something that's in sort of the back of our minds, as something that we want to get to as we go along here through analysis and look at that. So that's something that we're interested in, but we haven't looked at it yet.
Next one from Joshua Fangui, and asked, I'm a non-expert. I actually don't capture how the system determines when an area or polygon was disturbed.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I kind of went very quickly through that. So what we do is we look at that spectral signal, and basically we just do a simple analysis looking at where the spectral signal had decreased the most between consecutive years or sort of over a short period. And we assumed that in these harvest areas, because we knew these were areas designated as harvest, and we knew that and we were removing any pixels that had multiple disturbances and things, we assumed that strongest decrease in our signal meant that that's when the harvest happened. And that's when the trees were removed for harvest in that harvest area. So we were looking at the strongest change in the spectral signals indicating where the harvest was happening. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Next one from Marsha McKenzie and asks, will this technology be able to differentiate between vegetation communities?
That's also a very good question. At this point, it's not something that we've examined yet. It's something we would love to be able to do. I don't know yet whether that's something that we can do with exact certainty. I think there definitely can be places where this sort of satellite remote sensing can definitely help to differentiate between, say, a deciduous or a conifer stand. But that can be a complex thing with remote sensing. There's so many variables that go in there. So I think I'm hoping that we'd be able to get a general idea, perhaps, of vegetation community, but not an exact idea compared to what you would see on the ground if you can go out there and say, this is X vegetation community or Y vegetation community. So I think we do have limitations as far as being able to really accurately say what sort of vegetation community is there. So we understand that we're looking at broader patterns here. All right. Here
Right,
I
good.
see.
And, yep, so there's a number of people say great presentation. And from Barney, he said, no, it's all good. Maybe classification was the wrong word. Anyway,
okay.
There's another question from Ed Kapuk, and he asked, will you be developing a catalog of spectral signatures representing different regeneration cover classes, which include area views and the ground level shots?
That would be awesome if we can do that. It's not something, honestly, that we've discussed at this point. We're still, because we now have the data set, and now we're taking the steps to really understand what those spectral signatures mean. That's something that would be we would love to do in the longer term. We're not there yet, but thank you for the suggestion. That knowing that that's something that would be of interest and use to the wider community, then that's something that I'm going to make a note of and keep on our radar. Because if we're able to have that sort of a catalog, that would be really great. I would love to be able to do that. I think we're a little ways off from that yet.
Sure. That's the question so far in the chat box, and I wonder, the folks, you can unmute yourself if you have any questions, and can directly ask Jennifer.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for the excellent presentation. I really loved your presentation, and great work, on provincial scale card block regeneration. I actually I have been using Land Render for last 2 years, mainly for oil and gas reclamation assessment. So one of the issues, one of the challenges that I am facing is if the site has wetland or water body, then NBR index really doesn't work well. So have you faced any such challenges with NBR?
With the work that we've done in harvest areas, we haven't had wetlands to deal with yet. As we're getting into those oil sand areas, that is something that I think we're going to start coming up with. I haven't had that challenge myself personally yet, but I can completely understand that challenge looking at water bodies and things with NBR or NDVI or a lot of spectral vegetation indices. It's really, the signals aren't are kind of can be all over the place. So I haven't personally come across that challenge, but I can understand why it would be a challenge. So I'm afraid I don't have any. I'm sorry, I got distracted here. I don't have any particular like thoughts on where to go with that, but if you want to chat later about it, I'm certainly happy to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I would definitely chat with you offline. I mean, I see a lot of overlap. We can probably, collaborate, and especially when you mentioned that, you are also exploring this algorithm to understand regeneration on other footprints. So from oil and gas perspective, I have done quite a bit of testing. And also, in addition to the trend, I am also using the Sentinel-2 latest imagery, which is 10-meter resolution, with land cover classes, so that, if the trend shows that the vegetation is regenerating, so that we can understand that what type of vegetation in general it is, if it is a deciduous forest or grassland, so yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, bringing in the Sentinel to help with that, those sorts of details. And yeah, I would very much enjoy chatting later and learning about your experiences with doing this. I'm really just getting started myself, so it's there's a lot for me to learn here.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you. And is there any more questions, folks? Okay, it's great. If not, I'd like to thank you, Jennifer, again for your excellent presentation today, and it's very informative. And also thank you all the questions from participants, and also thank you for Jennifer to take your time to answer the questions. This is wonderful. And so again, the presentation slide deck and also recorded webinar will be available soon. We'll send to everyone later. And again, I apologize for the some technical challenge in the beginning, and please forgive me, and appreciate your continued support. And this modeling community practice, MCOP, is monthly webinar. We have been held with the intention of sharing the modeling information and also knowledge, as well as the innovative decision support tool or system around the various environmental issues. The webinar are open to all the modelers, scientists, resource managers, planners, policy analysts, etc., and from different business areas, including air, water, land, environmental health, economic, biodiversity, emergency response, etc., artificial intelligence as well. So if you or you know someone would like to make presentation to share information, so please contact us. We definitely will schedule you in. And thank you, everyone, for your support. And again, thank you, Jennifer, for your great presentation. And thank you for all the participants. And have a nice day, and also stay safe and healthy. Okay, so with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If anyone wants to reach out by email later on, they're welcome to email me and ask more questions too. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.